Hi, I'm James, and in today's Coach's Corner we're going to be talking about rep ranges and discussing what the best rep ranges are for some specific training goals. So if you've ever wondered what the difference between training with low reps and high reps is, or what rep range is best for your training goal, then hopefully this video is going to answer some of your questions. So you can find this table or something very similar in most strength and conditioning textbooks, and what it shows you is the optimal rep ranges to use for the specific training goals of strength, power, hypertrophy or muscle building, and muscular endurance. So if your goal was to build strength, you would want to train in the 1 to 5 rep range using loads that were 80 to 100% of your 1 rep max. Your 1 rep max being the maximum amount of weight that you could use for 1 rep. Power, when it comes to power, so strength is about how much force you can produce, and power is all about how quickly you can produce that force. So if you want to train to become more fast and explosive, then you should follow these power training guidelines of 1 to 5 reps with loads 30 to 85% of your 1 rep max. Now this can be a bit confusing because obviously we have this overlap between the strength and power, so both on the 1 to 5 reps, but the key difference with the two is with the speed of the movement. So with strength work, although the intention is to move quickly, the heavy weight means that the movement is slow. So for example, with a heavy barbell back squat, although the intention might be to move the bar quickly, the heavy load means that the bar might only be moving around 0.3 to 0.5 meters per second. But if we're training for power, we need that movement to be faster if we're going to get the adaptations that we want to see. So if we were performing a barbell back squat with a dynamic effort to try and improve power, then we might be looking to try and hit bar speeds of 0.8 to 1 meters per second. So you can see that the movements have to be significantly faster. And if we were using the Olympic lifts and performing something like a power clean, then we might expect to see movements, to see bar speeds of 1.4 meters per second. So you can see how the movements have to be faster if we're training for power. The reps are low because if we were to use higher reps, then we'd see the speed and the power start to drop off. And the wide intensity range just reflects the wide variety of exercises that you might use when training for power. So if we were using something like a barbell squat jump, then we might be using loads at the lower end, around that 30% of 1 rep max. Whereas if we were using Olympic lifts like snatches and cleans, then we would use higher percentages, so somewhere around the 70 to 85% of 1 rep max area. Okay, so when it comes to hypertrophy or muscle building, we'd want to be working in the 6 to 12 rep range with kind of moderate intensity weights. And if our goal was to improve muscular endurance, then we'd be using 12 plus reps per set and using loads at 65% or less of 1 rep max, because these are the loads that are going to allow you to lift more repetitions. Now, this is a great table for basically giving us a fundamental framework to work on in terms of rep ranges. But the important thing to remember is we're never training for these qualities exclusively. So all this chart represents is the best way to train for those specific goals. But let's say you're training for strength, you're doing low reps, you're doing 1 to 5 reps per set. It doesn't mean that you're going to improve strength exclusively. You're still going to improve power at this range. You can still build muscle, so you can still get a hypertrophy effect at this range, and you can still improve muscular endurance at this range. And equally, if you're working at high reps, let's say you're doing sets of 15, we know that they're great for building muscular endurance, but you can still build muscle in this range and you can still build strength at this range. It's just that there's this continuum where lower reps are generally better for building strength and higher reps are generally better for building endurance. So there is some recent research to suggest that reps outside of that traditional 6 to 12 hypertrophy rep range are as effective at building muscle as that hypertrophy rep range. So a 2015 study by Schoenfeld et al. Compared training with 25 to 35 reps per set with training with 8 to 12 reps per set. And what they found is that the 8 to 12 group gained significantly more strength, which is exactly what we'd expect from the previous chart, that the lower reps built more strength. And the 25 to 35 group, they saw bigger improvements in muscular endurance, which again is exactly what we'd expect from that previous chart. But the interesting finding was there was no difference in terms of the hypertrophy, in terms of muscle building. So both groups saw significant increases in muscle mass with no significant difference between the two groups. So what this study and other studies like this have shown is that these higher rep ranges can be as effective at building muscle muscle as that traditional hypertrophy 6 to 12 rep range. So what about low reps? So another study by Kubo et al. 2020 compared training with 7 sets at 4 rep max, 4 sets at 8 rep max, and 3 sets at 12 rep max in a 10-week training study. And the total training volume, so that's sets times the reps times the load, was equal for all the groups. And that explains why some of the groups were performing 7 sets, some were performing 4, and some were performing 3, because they equated the training volume for each of the groups. And what they found was the 4 rep max group and the 8 rep max group gained the most strength, which again is exactly what we'd expect from that first chart. The lower reps built the most strength. But again, there was no significant difference in hypertrophy. So all groups saw the same increase in muscle volume. So again, what this suggests this time is that the lower reps can be as effective at building muscle as that higher rep group. So from this study and other similar studies, this has led researchers to conclude that muscle growth is similar regardless of the rep range, providing the total training volume, again, so that's sets, reps, and load, is equal, and that sets are taken close to failure being the point where you can't do another rep, and the load is over 30% of 1 RM. So really, really high repetition sets might not work, but across everything else, hypertrophy is similar with all rep ranges. So does that make that 6 to 12 hypertrophy range a bit of a myth if all rep ranges are equally effective at building muscle? Well, from a practical point of view, that 6 to 12 hypertrophy rep range is still very useful, as it's the easiest rep range to accumulate volume in. So the problem with doing low reps is you're just going to have to perform more sets to get that same training effect. So if we think back to that Kubo et al. 2020 study we just talked about, so essentially, although all groups gained the same amount of muscle, the group that performed 3 sets of 12 saw the same increase in muscle mass as the groups that performed 7 sets of 4. And it's obviously far less time consuming to perform 3 sets than it is to perform 7 sets. And if we just perform 3 sets, that gives us more time to include other exercises in our session. So from a practical point of view, that 6 to 12 rep range is really useful for building muscle. What those studies do show, though, is that the old myth that high reps and light weights don't build muscle is definitely not true, because what they've shown is that high reps are really effective at building muscle. So that's something that you used to hear a lot, was that, if you don't want to build muscle, stick to high reps and light weights. Well, that's definitely not the case, because, as I say, they can be really effective at building muscle. Okay, so to finish with some sort of practical take-home points, I would say you could use that table that we saw in the first chart to guide your rep ranges, so based off your training goal. So for example, if your goal was to improve muscular endurance, then we'd know that you want to dedicate a good amount of your training to training in reps at 12 or more. But what I would say is, no matter what your training goal is, you should still use a variety of rep ranges, because they all provide slightly different adaptations. And regularly changing our rep range will just adjust the stimulus and give your body something different to adapt to. Okay, thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you next time.